Alrighty, so it's here, man. It is time. It is time for the Arms Warrior Guide video. I said I'd do it. I got it. Finally got it done. I did this little write-up here. This should be in the description if it'll fit. If it doesn't fully fit, I'll just make sure all the important stuff is in there. But this is... but with the new tier coming up, recently, today, Arms and Fury both got nerfed by 5%, so they're just still relatively the same as they were in terms of balance. We were easily on the upper end of single target to the point where you might bring 2 warriors or to the raid, which you never really want. Let's be honest, you never want to be in a spot where your class is being brought multiple times to the world first, because like Nerebar Palace, you'll just get nerfed into the ground, and then it will make your class not good and not fun for Mythic Plus. So being upper end of the pack currently, which is where we are, as well as it being a little more difficult in raid for melee than I'd say for range, just because of how the fights are designed. That 5% nerf, I was hoping it was going to be more like 3%, but where we basically stood was our current sim was 3.1 million. You just times that by 0.05. That gives you 150k DPS loss. This is a rough estimate because there is damage from our enchants, from trinkets, from oils, from whatever outside sources that aren't directly our class, right, or raid buffs. So this number is not entirely accurate. This is just a rough estimate. So we probably lost around 140, 150k, something like that, which still puts us easily at the upper end of 2.9, almost 3 million DPS, which is still very, very good. So the nerfs were warranted, and I'm glad we're getting a slight aura tune to just kind of bring us still in the upper end, but somewhat in line, so we're not going to get, essentially not going to get beat over the head like we did in Nerebar Palace, which sucked. But the other thing I plan on doing as well is a small, like, survival-ish kind of guide, where it's like, hey, these dungeons have this kind of loot you might be looking for, these trinkets. I have the build for the single target Slayer and AoE Colossus builds, respectively, here, which I will be putting in the description as well. And in that video, I will also put out updated Fury single target and AoE builds there for you to just to have kind of just so you have them, just so we're there, right? In case you feel like playing Fury or Arms. They're close enough where you could play either of them and be just fine. I'm personally going to be playing Arms just because the way the fights are designed, how things are kind of working, it just seems Arms fits way better in with how the raid is going to go. Outside of that, for Mythic Plus, I'm probably going to be playing Colossus. I'm probably going to be playing Colossus, but if Fury ends up being better, I'll play Fury for that, so I'm not really too worried. This is mainly focused on raid. And within here, or I guess we should start at the beginning, just kind of talking about our talent tree and what has really changed. They removed endurance training. It's over here in reinforced plates, so now we get 10% more stamina for free. Very good. The reason why we're not taking Spear is because essentially this talent row is so strong, you essentially take everything here. They did also nerf Thunderous words, as well as our bleeds have been falling behind in damage anyway. So because our bleeds have been falling behind and Thunderous words got nerfed on top of that, we don't really focus on bleeds that much, so we don't play Skull Splitter anymore. Thank God. We're also moving away from Fierce Follow-Through, which you didn't really have to think too much about, to Opportunist. Opportunist is actually going to be a very large part of our damage and very, very important with how much damage Overpower is going to be doing. But fret not, in here I will also have an Opportunist tracker, so it's easy for you to see when you get the proc, and a sudden death conditional Weakauras, which helps you when to use sudden death, because Warrior, it feels weird for Warrior to become kind of a Weakauras class, but because there's so many different conditionals, that's like, if this, then that, then this, it's easier just to have a Weakauras go bing when you're supposed to press a button, rather than you having to sit there, stare at your buffs, stare at the enemy buffs, try to figure out what buffs you have, what they have. It takes the thought process out of it, and it goes bing, and you hit the button. That's kind of it. I'll show you in here as well. And the reason why we're also not taking Spear is because for Spear to be worth it and to be valuable, it means we're taking points away from these important talent points here. And just because the increased rage regeneration is a little better in single target, somehow we're playing okay. Art and capstones are so bad, we are now playing Warlord's Torment, a talent considered so bad, we didn't think we would ever take this thing. But this is the highest simming version, and this is what we will be playing. Warlord's Torment is very, very bad, but it's somehow better than Thunderous Warrior 10 Champion's Bite. Probably because it interacts with Cruel Strikes, which gives us increased crit damage on execute. You have increased crit damage and crit chance through Show No Mercy on execute, Ashen Juggernaut bonus execute damage, critical thinking, execute, refund, improved execute, refund. So like a lot of the spec is just focused around execute, really. Now let's go into our opener. Our opener is pretty simple. Like I said, I'll try and put everything down in the description here. But it is basically the same as it was before. You charge, Thunderclap, Thunderous Roar. Personally, I have Thunderous Roar in my avatar macro. It's a very minor gain to roar and then use Avatar and Colossus Smash together instead. Very, very minor. So minor that I don't do it. But if you want to min-max, you can Thunderous Roar first, and then you'll use Avatar, Colossus Smash together, Bladestorm, and then into your normal rotation with Mortal Strike, and it'll look a little something like this. And while I'm doing the opener, you'll probably hear, you'll see the Weakauras pop up here, and it'll go ching, and then, yeah. I'm going to spec into Opportunist here, just so it'll show it. But there's also another Weakauras that shows Opportunist as well. And I'll explain them as they happen. Charge. This is the Opportunist buff. So this just lets you know when you have this buff up, so it lets you cast your Overpower, right? So then you'll go into your Avatar Roar, Colossus Smash, Bladestorm, and you hear that ching, that sound. That takes, because of how the spec works now, that takes precedence over everything else. When you hear the ching sound, you hit the button. When you see the Overpower light up, you hit the button. That's what these Weakauras will do. They are in the description of this, both here, and this also is a thank you to Wally. He is an EU man, I believe, and he has helped me. He gave me those Weakauras, and those Weakauras are also in the Warbreaker Discord. I'll put a link to that as well. It's a primarily European made Discord, but they do have a lot of useful informations and sim sheets and all that kind of shit there. So if you're interested, go take a look. But basically, like I said, here's how the Sudden Death Weakauras works. If your Juggernaut stacks are too low, or like if your Juggernaut stacks are about to expire, right, it will go off. If you have 3 stacks of marked for execution, it will go off. See, 3 seconds left on Ashen Juggernaut, it pops up. So it essentially takes the thought process out of when you would normally, what buttons you're hitting, when you're normally hitting them, yada, yada, yada. So it takes that thought process out of playing, of how Sudden Death works and interacts. There is a lot of RNG involved. Sometimes you'll just keep 15 stacks of Ashen Juggernaut forever. Sometimes you won't. There is a decent amount of RNG involved. Which can be the difference in parsing, but realistically, parsing comes with proper play and consistency, so we don't focus on that. We just want to focus on consistent play. So what is our actual priority if we have all of these buttons and everything going? So here's what you need to really just kind of think about when you're playing, and the rest of it just kind of flows. So for your cooldown usage, you'll use your cooldowns on cooldown and only hold them if they're within 5 to 6 seconds of each other so they can benefit from each other. It's pretty simple. For your priority, you want to Mortal Strike on cooldown. The way Mortal Strike works, it'll work a little different with this talent build. Because with this talent build, you'll have Exhilarating Blow, so sometimes it'll reset its own cooldown. But essentially, What I'm going to give you is the just starter single target priority, and then I also have an advanced priority down here, which you can move over to if you want to focus more on the min-max of things. So, Mortal Strike on cooldown. Try and keep your Ashen Juggernaut stacks up. The Weakauras will help with this. Consume Opportunist Procs before casting another ability. The Weakauras will help with this. One of the reasons why the Opportunist Weakauras is actually important is you'll notice that if I proc Opportunist, it pops up over here faster than this animation pops up. So why it's essentially important and what it does is it just lets you know as soon as possible. It's very, very slight, but it just lets you know as soon as possible, as well as you can notice this animation for Opportunist Proc goes away. This thing doesn't. So it just lets you know that your Opportunist is ready, you should press it next. Very simple. That's why the tracker is very nice to have. But for your standard priority, Mortal Strike, whenever it's up, Overpower with the Opportunist Buff. If you can, use Execute, Overpower, refresh Rend with Thunderclap, Rend or Thunderclap. So the reason for that, why it says under 9 seconds, is what's called Pandemic. And what this mechanic essentially was, I've explained it in the Fury video, is once your ability, you'll see it light up here, once your ability is below a certain threshold, like you see it's under the 6-second threshold, when you use the ability, because Rend has a 21-second uptime, when you use an ability that refreshes Rend, instead of going to 21 seconds, it will go to 27 seconds. So you can refresh the duration without losing any of the damage, is what that essentially means. So this should be 6 seconds. My bad. And then for your single target filler, you'll be pressing slam, and then you'll just be hitting the slam button over and over again until you get an Opportunist proc or just your normal priority, right? This is what we're going for. In execute, your priority is going to be Overpower with the Opportunist buff and less than 85 rage. So if you've recently cast an execute on a target, you'll generally be... It costs 40 rage, which you get 12 back. So generally, your execute rotation's going to look something like execute, execute, overpower, Mortal Strike. Is generally what it's going to look like, unless you get that Enduring Blows proc. But essentially, you are going to be, whenever you get an Opportunist buff, you're pressing it. Whenever your Mortal Strike's up, you're pressing it. Otherwise, you're slamming execute. That's kind of it. The other reason why execute or Opportunist and Overpower are really important to press is we take Finishing Blows in our new build, which will generate just more. It'll just generate more rage and execute, make it and smooth it out quite a bit. And it's very, very simple, right? Our execute rotation, 4 buttons. Actually, no, 3 buttons, that's it. It is this button, this button, and this button. We don't even press Rend because Bloodletting reapplies Rend below 35%. We press 3 buttons in execute phase. Very, very simple. Now, moving on to the advanced way to play arms, it doesn't seem that different. It changes our priority a little bit. Like you can see, the starter rotation Mortal Strike's #1, but in here, Mortal Strike is the 3rd. Below Overpower with an Opportunist proc, and execute if any of these conditions are met. By the way, all of these conditions are brought up by the sudden death condition Weakauras, so you don't have to think about it. Or the Opportunist tracker, so you don't have to think about it. Literally, it's, hey, does the thing go bing? You press it. Does the Opportunist thing pop up? You press it. It's very, very simple. But it just takes some practice to get used to and be able to use the information on your screen, right? So the advanced priority is execute if you have 2 stacks of sudden death, 3 stacks of mark for execution, or Ashen Juggernaut is about to fall off. The buff. Next is Overpower with Opportunist proc. Then it is Mortal Strike. Then it is Overpower. Then it is Rend or T-Clap to refresh the duration. Then it is Slam. And obviously, if you're in execute phase, you don't have to press this, so slam moves up. But realistically, you're not really going to press slam. If you would press slam in execute phase, you're just going to press execute because it costs the same amount of rage, even if you only have 20 rage. So the spec, at a glance, right? At a glance, is very, very simple, right? You hit the Mortal Strike on cooldown. If you get an Opportunist proc, you hit the proc. If you have any of these conditions met, the Weakauras goes ding, and you hit the execute. It's very, very simple. You send your cooldowns on cooldown. If they're within a couple seconds of each other, like 5-6 seconds, you will hold them so you can actually, Colossus Smash and then Bladestorm. The main reason why we're not trying to hold things specifically to, line up with each other is because ARMS just plays anger management in general. Anytime you're spending rage, your big cooldowns are reducing themselves. So anytime you're sitting on them and not sending them is time that they're not getting their cooldown reduced, so it's just a damage loss. It is effectively like every other spec in the game. You're just doing a balancing act between your resources and your procs, making sure you hit your procs, making sure you're not running out of resource. That's kind of it. Keeping your debuffs and buffs up. That's it. Warriors is a very, very simple spec. Even with the advanced rotation, most of this becomes thoughtless, whereas it's like, hey, follow the pop-ups, hit the Mortal Strike, hit Overpower if you can't hit anything else, slam if you can't hit anything else, and then when your Rend is about to fall off, hit Rend or T-Clap. Very, very simple. But like I said, I'll have the sudden death condition Weakauras tracker and the Opportunist tracker in. All you'll have to do is go in to your Weakauras and just move them to where you want, right? Like this times power one, this could probably be a little lower. This one could be over a little more. The sudden death. Oh, where is it? What was it called? Yes. I don't remember what that Weakauras was called. This one. Slayer execute conditions. Probably move this over here. Maybe even make it just a little bigger, right? But obviously this looks like a mess. But it's very simple and very straightforward, and especially for single target. And the only other thing to consider is, well, are you hitting one target or can you hit two targets? Like in Ray, there are some times you can hit multiple targets. So if you're hitting multiple targets, you just hit the sweeping strikes button. That's kind of it. It is very, very simple. It just has a couple of these little rules that if you want to min-max a spec that you have to follow, right? Otherwise, very simple, very straightforward. This is the build we'll be running. Yeah, like I said, it's pretty simple. And the other build for ARMS that we'll be going into is the Colossus build. This build you can already kind of play on live, but because of how they've actually buffed the spec, it's going to be pretty good in Mythic Plus. It's going to do a lot of AoE damage. They have buffed Mortal Strike multiple times, making it a very, very good button to press in single target. So in this build, we're actually going back to and taking Battle Lord and Exhilarating Blows. We just want to send on single target. We're just sending as many Mortal Strikes as possible, and on AoE, we are sending as many cleaves as possible. What they've tried to do with the spec, Slayer single target for Raid is a bit more finicky, but for AoE and for Colossus, it is insanely straightforward. Let me swap over so I can show you the opener. But the only thing that is kind of actually annoying about Colossus is how many globals your opener is. So if we look at Slayer, it's charge, Thunderclap, Roar, Avatar, Colossus Smash, Bladestorm. Your opener is 5 and you're already slamming, right? Colossus has a little more setup, and because we're playing Colossus in AoE, we want to mine the Merciless Bone Grinder perk. So while we have Ravager going, our cleave does 50% more damage. So our Ravager is actually more delayed. It is still casting Mortal Strikes, but our Ravager is actually a little more delayed than you would think. So here's our opener for Colossus. You'll charge Thunderclap to spread your bleeds. You will Roar, Avatar, Roarbreaker, then you will Demolish, then you will Sweeping Strikes, then you will Ravager, then you will Cleave. It is very annoying. Sweeping Strikes is only like a small, like kind of like a half global as well. Oops, this is actually wrong. This needs to be here. Sorry. Me doing this. Actually, no, I just realized something very bad. So we're going to import this here. I should have done it this way. Take a point here, take a point here. And this is actually the new import. There we go. I had Sudden Death instead of Fervor of Battle. That was my mistake, so I have that here now. But the reason why Cleave is so important is because a lot of things affect it now. Collateral damage affects it. Cleave by itself does a ton of damage. Bone Grinder affects Cleave, which is why we're casting Ravager so late, right before we Cleave. So we Sweeping Strikes, Ravager, then Cleave to get as much value as we can out of it. A Battle Lord does not reset Cleave, only in Exhilarating Blows. So Cleave can only reset itself. But Cleave also casts a Slam at your primary target if you hit multiple targets. And if your Sweeping Strikes is up, that Slam does Cleave to an additional target as well. So you do a ton of AoE damage. Just the opener is really weird. The opener is just really weird and annoying. But for cooldown usage, it's the same as single target, right? If the cooldowns line up and they're close together, you can hold them and do them together. Otherwise, you just send them on cooldown. So let me show you the opener here again. It is going to be Charge, Thunderclap, Avatar Roar, Warbreaker, then Demolish, then Sweeping Strikes, Ravager to activate our Merciless Bone Grinder to do more cleave damage, then we will start cleaving in our normal priority. And it will look like this. And the priority is basically send as many cleaves as possible. And if you can't cleave, you're hitting Overpower. And if you can't hit Overpower, you're hitting Mortal Strike. And if you can't hit Mortal Strike, you're hitting Thunderclap. So let's look at our single target rotation. Our single target rotation is simple. It's actually very, very simple. We don't have many modifiers like we do in our Slayer build that we have to think about and consider with Opportunist and Sudden Death and Mark for Execution stacks. We don't have any of that. Colossus is actually very, very straightforward, where it's simply, if you can Mortal Strike, hit the Mortal Strike button. If you can Overpower, hit the Overpower button. If you can't hit any of those, hit Slam. And then if your bleed is about to fall off, you can Thunderclap instead of Slam. That's really it. It is so, so simple on single target. Because you can even see on pure single target, Cleave still does less damage than Slam by itself, and Slam is actually getting a bigger buff than Cleave going into the new patch. So Slam is still the priority to press, as Cleave will not activate any bonuses or give you Colossal Might or anything like that. The whole goal of the spec is to just send as many Mortal Strikes as you can. So while Slayer is focused on Execute, Colossus is focused on Mortal Strike, essentially. And that is just for single target. For AoE, this is assuming you have multiple targets. Once again, cleave as many times as you cleave whenever it's up. Overpower if you can't cleave. If you can't overpower, you send a Mortal Strike. If all of those are down, you send a Thunderclap. And if somehow everything is down, you can start slamming an AoE. Not efficient, but I mean, like, it got nothing else to press. So while there is a lot more on single target and raid to kind of focus up on, these Weakauras essentially take the thinking realistically out of it. And then when you're playing Colossus and Mythic Plus, it is very, very, very straightforward. All it is, hit the Mortal Strike, hit the Overpower. If you can't do that, hit the Slam. And AoE, hit Cleave as many times as you can, hit Overpower. If you can't do that, hit Mortal Strike, Thunderclap. Very, very simple. The way they have changed and buffed this spec is previously we had a lot of different modifiers, and we thought about Dreadnought, and we thought about this, and we thought about that, but they've kind of made Warrior dumber in that sense, where for this Mythic Plus build at least, it's like, yeah, press the AoE button in AoE, dumbass. press the single target button, single target, idiot. Like, that's just kind of what they did with these buffs, and I like that. I like it simple. I like it straightforward, and that's really kind of it for arms. We probably won't be playing Colossus in raid ever, just because Colossus' single target got a huge hit after they removed Execute from Colossal Might, which means we do less Demolishes. Demolish also got a 30% buff, by the way. So Demolish does a ton of damage. But even though it got a buff, it's still 5 to 6% behind Slayer. So there's no real reason to play it in single target. But yeah, that's kind of it for arms, man. I'll put these in the description. I feel like if I keep going, I'll just keep talking in circles. But I'll put these in the descriptions. You can put on a side screen, second monitor, or whatever, if you just want to have this information there. And once again, I do need to do a big shout to Mr. Fishy. His name is Crispy, or you might know him as Fishy in the Warrior Discords. He helped me with making sure, or getting my rotation priorities down correctly, or at least as close to what they could do in the Sims. I tried to make like the starter one simpler instead of the advanced one. But thanks to Mr. Fishy, I've also enjoyed talking to him a bunch. And then once again, another thank you to Wally and the Warbreaker Discord for these conditional Weakauras for sudden death procs, and your opportunist tracker. It just makes it simpler, and there's just less to think about. And when there's less to think about, you can focus more on the fight. I personally, when it comes to like Weakauraing up my spec, I don't really like doing it. But having access to this information and not using it would simply make me a worse player, honestly, and I don't like that. So I will use whatever I can, use whatever tools I have to perform to the best of my ability. But yeah, that's kind of it, honestly. It is a very simple spec. The opener for AoE is kind of weird just because of where you want to place your Ravager to maximize your cleave damage, but other than that, in single target, you want to hit the Mortal Strike. When you can execute, you want to hit the execute. Between, you hit Overpower, and otherwise you're hitting Slam or refreshing your dock. It is a very, very simple spec. If there's things I somehow missed or did not cover, please feel free to either join my Discord and ask me personally. You can ask here in the comments. If I'm on stream, feel free to ask me shit, because it is possible I did not explain this well enough here. So if you have any other questions, just let me know, man. I am happy to help. But other than that, the next video that should be coming out here, maybe on Monday or maybe Tuesday during the downtime. I don't know exactly when. But essentially, I kind of want to do like a warrior survival guide, and what it's going to be is, hey, if you're playing and checking out arms, here's the builds for those. If you want to play and check out Fury, here's the highest simming builds for that. And then if you want, depending on what you're looking for, Mythic Plus, try and focus on this dungeon or this dungeon and focus on these trinkets, yada yada. You know what I mean, right? Just like nothing big, but it's going to be hopefully something that's kind of small. Talking about just basically kind of talking about what's different with Warrior coming into the patch, and then some things you can like focus on going into the patch, and prepare for. Yeah. That's kind of it, man. I've said that multiple times, and I hope I've done a good job describing this crap. Best of luck out there, and I will see you on the battlefield. Alrighty, bye-bye.